First impressions can be deceiving. Initially, I believed Paul was psychotic and the New World historians kindred spirits, but beliefs can be deadly wrong. I kept asking myself, if Paul was right and the historians were protecting the Parthia group, what was the reason, the larger agenda? And how far would Arnold and his team go to protect their secret? Remembered one of them from the train, Charles, quiet but intense. Never saw the other before, but I'd come to know his name, Subu, a mercenary and a very skilled tracker. The two men were quick on my trail after I left Louisville. Didn't take them long to catch up with me.
Russell Shoemaker, we don't want to hurt you. We only want what's ours. Just leave it and walk away.
It was tempting, but Paul had shown me the truth, and I was determined not to let his death be in vain. I'd met a guy in New York, worked for the FAA. He actually saw planes go off the grid the night the EMP hit. He assumed it was happening to flights all over the world. But with their tracking system knocked out as well, he had no way to confirm it. It struck me how technology from only a few months earlier looked like fossils from some forgotten time, and how survival in this new world often meant repurposing the relics of the old world. My diversion didn't fool them for long. When they couldn't find a body, they knew I'd escaped. It was summer, but the hard rains still came with regularity. And without clean tracks, I was able to lose them for a few more days. But I was running on fumes. Needed a safe place to rest and regroup. Just assumed the place was empty like most every other house you passed.
Got a gun, and I ain't afraid to use it.
I apologized profusely and tried to explain my situation, but...
Sorry to disturb you, man, but we're looking for this man. He's very dangerous. Wondering if he came through here recently.
At that moment, all I could hope was that I'd made a good first impression, because now my life depended on it. The worst of times can reveal the best in people. The people of Nashville would prove that, and much more.
Saw him all right. Told him the same I'm telling you. I'll shoot you both, you don't get off my property.
Alice knew dangerous men. She'd cooked at the local prison. Said Subu looked a hell of a lot more dangerous than me. Still, she wanted to know why I was being hunted by those two characters. I told her the whole story. She seemed suspicious. That is, until I mentioned I was just trying to get home. To my wife and daughter. Suddenly, there was a connection between us.
I lost Nick the night it happened. Thought he was just working a second shift again. But he never came home. We'd always dreamed of getting out of that wretched apartment. Buying a big house like this in Belmead. Just wish Nick was here to share it with me.
Keeping up a mansion was a full-time job, and surviving in a barter economy meant Alice had to farm for trade. So she let me stay, if I'd lend a hand. It was a good arrangement for both of us. But I knew Charles and Subu were still out there, somewhere. Every few days, I loaded up the carriage and Alice went to Nashville to trade. Finally decided to join her. I hadn't seen Charles and Subu in a week. Nevertheless, I decided to play it safe by coming up with a disguise. Alice said the city hadn't changed much from when she was a little girl, and she liked it that way. Even after the fall, things were pretty much the same. Following major disasters, there's always a spike in patriotism, but was there really a country anymore? While Alice made her trades, I took a look around. realized I'd probably made a mistake leaving Rose Mansion. So I killed some time in another place that felt exactly the same, except, of course, in how you paid. As luck would have it, I overheard something that would change everything, offering the first clue about what really happened to the people.
I'm telling you, Bart, it's spontaneous combustion. Seen it with my own eyes.
The way a person talked about the fall was always revealing. Who they were was usually a function of what they believed. Travis Jay's theory of spontaneous combustion made perfect sense to me, given he was an engineering student and a horror movie buff.
My friends thought I was lame working at a gas station, but I took the night shift, so I get paid to do my homework. It was about 4 in the morning when it happened. I know, 'cause Freddie always came by on his way to the bakery. I couldn't believe my eyes, but I didn't have to.
Since the security system ran off a battery, Travis suspected the camera taped the event before the EMP fried it.
Hey Travis, why don't you spontaneously combust for us?
And despite ridicule from the locals, Travis believed that surveillance tape could prove his theory. He figured out the only way to replay the tape would be to use older technology, the kind using vacuum tubes. So he built a sort of video playback machine with old recording equipment from the music studios around town.
Mr. Shoemaker, I think you're more excited than me to see what's on that damn tape.
He said if I stuck around Nashville a while longer, I could watch his first test. When I got back to Alice, she was worried sick I'd been caught by Charles and Subu. I apologized. I told her I'd been with Travis. And the good news was we might get answers soon to explain the fall. That set her off. She called Travis a fool, said I shouldn't be encouraging him.
Why can't you people just accept things the way they are?
I'd spent a week with Alice and we'd gotten along so well, but I really didn't know her like I thought. Told her it was probably time for me to move on. She tried to explain she didn't want things to go back to the way they were, that even without Nick, she liked the world better now, without technology distracting us from what's really important. I finally realized Alice looked strong, but inside, she was scared and lonely. Her way of coping was to believe things were meant to be this way.
You coming into my life, Russ? I believe that was meant to be too.
She said me being around made her feel alive again. And she wanted to do something special for me. I warned Alice it was risky. If Charles and Subu were watching, they probably wouldn't take kindly to the fact that she'd lied to them. But she said it was a risk worth taking. For the first time since I left home, I was actually enjoying myself. Got lost in the moment. Forgot where I'd come from, where I was going. Alice was right. Despite everything that was about to happen, that night was a risk well worth taking. Every temptation has its cost. With Alice, I really weighed that cost. But despite the longing we both seemed to have, figured I was better off taking the high road. Still, I knew Alice was a temptation, one that would only become harder to resist the longer I stayed.
Russ, didn't want to wake you. Went to the market and I'm bringing you back a surprise.
Figured I had some time to kill, so I dropped in on Travis. Turned out, he was testing his playback machine. The idea was to scan every frame of the video, project it onto the monitor. We were both on pins and needles, waiting for our first glimpse of the footage. Seeing Travis's machine come to life, it occurred to me that third world countries with their outdated technology were much better equipped for life after an EMP. First world survivors would have to rely on good old-fashioned ingenuity. Finally, after about 20 minutes, something happened.
Hang on to your hat, Mr. Shoemaker. We got liftoff.
If I'd thought about it for even a second, weighed the cost, I never would have gone back in there. But I was convinced that videotape had the truth on it. Temptation too great to resist. I sensed it was an important piece of the puzzle, and fortunately, history would prove me right. Travis was confused. It looked like another EMP had overloaded his playback machine. But he said that was impossible. Told him about the working satellite I'd seen from New Eden, and Arnold's theory about the global EMP network. Maybe that network was still operational.
Boy, that opens up a whole other can of worms, don't it?
Whatever the reason, Travis said he was done. Proving his spontaneous combustion theory, it just wasn't worth risking his life for. He wanted me to take the videotape. Figured I might come across someone who had the technology to view it. Watching Travis give up his quest, I could see the burden lifted from him. He was moving on with his life. And when I got back to Rose Mansion, I tried to tell Alice it was time for me to move on as well. I was ready for a real emotional scene, but things had changed, and not just between us.
Shoemaker! I know you're in there.
With the New World historians hot on my trail, the last thing on my mind was JD and New Eden. Despite changing my course in Ohio, another horseman had somehow tracked me down. And it wasn't just my life on the line this time. Decided I had to draw the horseman far away from Rose Mansion as possible, for Alice's sake. The key to survival is something I learned way back in Cub Scouts. Always be prepared. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen.
He's here! The Walker!
I should have seen the signs. Irises were the symbol of New Eden. Alice embraced the fall and rejected technology, just like JD. Turned out, she was one of his missionaries. Only reason she saved me from the historians was so she could deliver me to JD. Because he had convinced her I was a wolf in sheep's clothing. A demon called the Walker.
You have sinned against New Eden. You will answer to our Savior.
It was strange.
He's dead.
No gunshot, no blood. Looked like a heart attack to me. For her part, Alice was shattered. Didn't know what to think. Before I left, I gave her a piece of advice. Be more careful about who you put your faith in. In a world where my enemies could be lurking behind every friendly face, I just couldn't imagine who was protecting me.